So let's start without further ado. And as you can guess, I'm going to talk about Docusaurus from my background and also from the, this first slide. So we'll talk about how to make your documentation easy, how to get started, how to build it, how to iterate on it. My name is Dmitry Vinnik. I'm an open source developer advocate at Facebook, and you can see my Twitter name right there below. So before we really dive into what Docusaurus is, I want to say thank you to all for joining. For some of you, it's quite late in the day. For some of you, it's early morning. So again, I appreciate your time today in this Algolia Community Party. So I always like to establish the agenda, and the way we'll go through this presentation will be by first we'll define the problem we'll try to solve today, and to solve the problem we have to define the solution that I'll try to propose and hopefully convince you that that solution indeed can solve the problem we've established. And also, of course, it has to be applicable to you, and we'll discuss how that solution fits your use case and how you can fit it to fit your market, your business, your project. So in that case, the problem would be, why do we need docs? How do we even write them? How do we get developers first to actually work on documentation? And the solution I would propose would be using Docusaurus. And Docusaurus hopefully will help you, define the importance of documentation. And we'll approach it from both theory and also practice. We'll do some demo. And at the end, we'll discuss how you can extend Docusaurus to fit your need and hopefully get you, excited about contributing to Docusaurus, since it's an open source project first. So again, let's get started to discussing why documentation. Why do we even care? I'd like to bring up other experts, to the table. And in this case, I was lucky enough to listen on a presentation by Jeff Sundquist at DevRelCon last year, where he's leading the Microsoft Docs team. And really, when he was describing how they approach developer experience, and they always start with great documentation. You have to have something of sort, getting starting guide. That's a guide that you can send developers, your users, your customers, the people who are interested in your project. You have to have something documented, and it doesn't not just something. It has to be something great, well, explained. That's why documentation is so important, because it's a foundation for anything you build. And if we were to go even more into metrics and were to just analyze top open source projects, obviously it's subjective how we analyze it. We just look at GitHub top open source projects, and 20% we found was would have documentation using just README, straight README, nothing else. And 80% would have documentation using a website. So it will be full website with search, localization, and obviously documentation. And as you can guess, 0% of those top 20 had no documentation. So if we were to just focus on that 80%, right, I say documentation using websites. Does it mean that we have to build a doc site from scratch? No, we all know it's going to be complicated, right? Have to handle styling, have to handle versioning, localization, search, and tons of other things that we don't want to have, start getting into. It's too much work. Nobody has time for that, unless you build in a documentation framework. And let's see. That's where I would like to talk about Docusaurus. So you don't have to build a doc site from scratch. And again, when it comes to Docusaurus, it has features like built-in search. Again, thanks to Algolia integration, it's as easy as just adding your credentials to a single config. It will start working for your site. We have versioning built in, which is essential if you have any sort of API documentation. If you're working with Java and you have a Java 8, Java 9, and so on, you want to make sure that your documentation stays in sync, it's versioned. You also would love to have localization. We're global. It's never, I'm currently in US. We don't want to just have, English documentation. We want to have documentation in French, in Spanish, and other languages, right? So it's extremely important. And imagine building it from scratch. Fortunately, we're working with companies like crowd in that provides this service. And it's, again, easy to integrate in Docusaurus. It has a Markdown. So again, if you want anyone to do anything for you, you have to make it easy. In this case, if you want your developers to write documentation and more importantly, to maintain the docs, you have to make it simple for them to write. And Markdown, if anything, is a de facto tool for writing docs these days. That's what we used to write README. And with Docusaurus v2, which I'll talk about more later on, it supports something called MDX, which basically allows you to have JSX right into your Markdown. In other terms, have React components in your Markdown. And I'll show you an example later on. And again, more importantly, if anything, Docusaurus is built on and supports React. You can have React pages. You can control your starting using React. And so if you have experience with that, it will be easy for you to get started and make changes to your site. Again, Docusaurus is amazing. I've talked quite a bit of things about theory, but let's get to demo. Let's get our hands on the keyboard, like the Docusaurus here, and I'll dive into my VS Code. So, all right, I've tried to make it as large as I can. And again, we open our terminal. I've prepared already a simple project here, but currently I have basically nothing apart from just the folders that we'll use for the presentation. But let's say you're starting from scratch. How do I get started from scratch? I go to Docusaurus website. This, as you can see, Docusaurus v1. So this is what we call v1, first version. But it's well documented. It's what's currently used in production. So let's make it a bit more exciting and look at Docusaurus v2. It's been brought up throughout presentation before mine. And so, v2 is something, again, in development right now. There are some missing features that we are, again, trying to complete, like localization. We're going to work on that more. But it has support for MDX. And as being brought up, it's very easy to switch to dark mode and light mode, which is all the rage is about these days. So let's get started. We go to documentation. After going to the doc site, let's make it larger. And I would go to Getting Started Guide. Again, Getting Started Guide. You go to the installation. And it's a simple operation to start with. So you just use npx, you initialize your site. You give a site a name and you choose a template. We provide you a couple of templates out of the box. We'll just go with classic. So let's say I want to build a new site. I copy that operation into my terminal and it starts, right? I don't want to wait and also, build the packages and all of that. It will create you a new site. You have to build npm or yarn, whatever you like to use. I already done that separately. So let's go right here. I created this simple site already that I called Algolia event. And to get started, it will be as easy as for me to run npm run start, and it would launch a site for me in just a mere seconds. Again, Docusaurus is a static generator, very performant, that I've mentioned, built with React. You can use Markdown to write your docs. Let's switch to the dark mode. Let's make it larger. And you can see minimalistic design, right? It has a name of your site, has a tagline, a few links to the getting started, and a couple of features highlighted with a nice footer that has links to the docs, the copyright statement, community links, so all the necessary stuff, right? And if I want to go to documentation, I would go to docs. Everything is in Markdown. If I wanted to edit those docs, I can scroll all the way to the bottom. And because this website is linked directly to GitHub, in my case, it can be GitLab if you want to. But if it's linked to GitHub, I go to edit this page, and because it's already versioned and committed to the GitHub repo, I can edit it right here in the GitHub. So we heavily rely on this developer workflow, right? Working with GitHub, editing in GitHub, making changes, making commits. So I don't even have to have a code open, the VS Code or whatever you like to use for working with Markdown. I can go right in the GitHub. The same goes for the blog. You have a list of blocks. Those blocks have tags, so you can do filtering of your blocks and also editing of the blocks. So again, it's a nice different audience here, right? Not kind of developers, but non-developers. So you don't really have to go to VS Code. an ID, but you can make changes right here. But it's all exciting. At the same time, just using the UI. I'm a developer myself. I like to use IDs. In this case, in VS Code, let's say I wanted to add a brand new blog. I would have to create a new file. I name it something like Algolia, right? And then I just, just start writing, right? So we would give it a name. We'll name it Algolia event. We would give it an ID. Algolia, and we'll say something cool like hello Algolia. And you don't have to, okay, so I wouldn't even have to refresh really. I can go right here and actually work with it if I wanted to. But in terms of what MDX is really, MDX, that I also given kind of mentioned briefly, just from the seeing an example here, you can see that this is pure JSX. You can see that it's basically React components right in the Markdown, and they get rendered in your UI right here and there. So basically, this is all highlight. This is not just CSS. This is a pure highlight constant in this case, which again does the span, the styling. So this is what MDX is. I'm not really diving into how exactly it's functioning, but more importantly is that you can easily make it implemented within your Markdown files. If I wanted to go, in more depth and do things like integrating my search, as been mentioned before, it's as easy as you would go to the configuration file of Docusaurus, and the only thing you would have to do is specify an API key, an index name, and optional Algolia specifications for your documentation site. One more important thing I really want to mention and give you a demo of would be the coolest thing, I think, personally, of Docusaurus V2 is the new architecture, where now it's all about plugins. So imagine before when you're working with V1 and you wanted to have some new functionality, let's say monitoring of config changes or sitemap generation or Google Analytics support, you would have to change the very platform Docusaurus was built on. So go to Docusaurus and make those changes. It's a hassle. It requires lots of permissions just on the GitHub workflow. It is complicated. But with V2, it has a plugin architecture. So you really imagine if you ever work with VS Code, you have lots of plugins to work with or extensions, as they call it here. So you can really write the functionality you need outside of Docusaurus V2 and then plug it into the site that you're working with. It's easy as, let's build one right now. We have quite a few pre-built on Docusaurus V2 for, again, Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, sitemap, the couple with the styling. It's very easy to integrate. And let me give you an example how to do it. So this is what we call Docusaurus config file. It looks, again, very straightforward. It has a title, tagline, URL. So links to the favicons that will, again, render on your site. But if I wanted to have a plugin, I'll scroll to the very bottom and I would type plugins. And in this array, I would specify a list of plugins. So let's build one. So to build a plugin, let's create a new folder. Let's call it monitoring plugin. Let's go into that folder really quickly. So let's go into the folder. Let's initialize the project. So we have the project initialized now. Let's create a quick file. Let's create the index.js, basically a starting point of this project. It can be whatever you'd like, but index.js in my case is the easiest because it's the default. And here, again, you create, and all that is documented, how to create a new plugin in something we call lifecycle API. So if I were to go to documentation, lifecycle API, very well documented. And it has something called async load content operation. So let's say I wanted to work with it and I have to give it a name. So let's say, sorry, made a mistake. So I would export a function. Function should return an object. We build in a plugin here that monitors any changes that we make to the configuration file. Let's say you want to write some regression test of some sort. So we call it monitoring plugin, and then again you have that function I just show you, load content, and in this operation you do whatever you wanted, whatever functionality you wanted. In my case, I want to make sure I print to the command line that config was changed, run tests. So now, how do I actually make it work? I go again to my Docusaurus config file, and because it's a local project, I just give a path to it. If it was in npm package, it will be also in npm package name. So let's go back to our site. Yes, so you can see I just make that change. So let's make a change to the config file. Let's, for example, change this URL. And you can see it was printed in a command line. Again, it's part of the site now. I didn't have to restart, I didn't have to rebuild. It's all working as is. So very simple, very straightforward. It's just part of the functionalities that I wanted to highlight today. Again, with React, you can build pages. I'm not going to go deep into that because we already give you a starting point here in the source folder under pages. Again, this is the React component, but this is what I wanted to talk about as a demonstration of Docusaurus. And I wanted to, finish this presentation by really talking about Docusaurus and you, how you can get started with it. Become part of our community. Go into Discord. It's a very active community and a very active chat where you can ask questions for your use cases. Our Twitter, we have updates. Help us with transition from V1 to V2, and try to build new plugins for the community or for yourself. So with that, I really want to say thank you again for listening. And with that, we'll go into the Q&A. Thank you.
Congrats, Dmitry. So let's give Dmitry a round of applause. And so yeah, you have 6 questions in the Q&A. Do you see them? I'm gonna ask them to you. So we have Sarah asking, if I'm not mistaken, Docusaurus is statically generated, but if JavaScript is enabled, it behaves as an SPA. Is there a way to make it fully static, no JavaScript takeover?
Fully static. I mean, so basically, yes, it's possible. So basically how it works really is when you build a Docusaurus, it generates the static files. So if I were to go to my VS Code and I were to run, if I were to run, let me show it to you right here. If I were to run npm run build, which is, I don't have it here because I'm not in the folder, but ultimately Docusaurus build, it creates the folder that we, for example, when we publish Docusaurus site for open source projects in Facebook, we commit them straight into the GitHub pages branch, and that's basically static content that you can render. So if I were to, again, to show it to you really quickly, it's as easy for me as run build, and it would generate a build folder for me right here. Give it a second. Yeah, because it has to generate and run through all of that, but then again, it's static, so you don't have to really rely on JavaScript per se. So yeah, it's this build folder. It does all of that for you. It was kind of awkward first, but again, the index is what you could see that, the index and all of that is basically rendered straight from the source, the JavaScript and the Markdown.
Okay, cool. So we have a question from Sardar. Any plans in the future to support also ACI doc markup language? ACI doc, sorry.
ASCII docs. Oh, okay. You can, so basically, I'm not quite sure what's missing today per se, but the fact that we support MDX in the Docusaurus V2, it allows you to do all sorts of things. For instance, I'm working with the research team that had the need for latex type of formatting for formulas, those complicated formulas with the logarithms and whatever, which I'm not even gonna, try to understand. But to properly render it in the UI, have this latex support with MDX, because you can plug it into the Markdown right away. You can technically have support for anything, including ASCII, latex, all sorts of things.
Okay, and we have Jiri asking a similar question as Sardar. The problem we have with Markdown is that you cannot embed a code snippet from real code, like test suite. You have to copy and paste it, which it introduces a big risk of code snippets not being compilable or working at all. How does Docusaurus solve this problem? Is there any tooling we could use to embed code directly?
Yes, again, it's all MDX. I feel like I'm not, so the MDX, to just show you the, how great it is, I'll just do it right here. It's that will give you really a lot of, explanation why it gives you functionality to do basically anything you'd like. So if I wanted to have, if I wanted to have, my bad, I'm not doing great. So if I want to have a new page called showcase, and in that page, I don't want to write the React right here, but I have this simple, component, right? React component does a showcase, does render whatever HTML in this case. If I want to render something else, I can also write it. In your case, if you want to have a straight up code, you can also do that. But I'll show it to you. So the reason why I'm even highlighting it is if I want to do index.js and I paste it, I go to my site. Sorry, I go to my site. Where's my site? Oh my God. Okay, let me. Okay. All right, I understand. I'm presenting. Actually, yes, I'm sharing the screen. Okay, let's go to my site again. So if I go to blocks, sorry, if I go to docs, okay. So it was on a new page, right? So to go to a new page, I have it right here, showcase. So this is what I created, that component, right? But it's not what I'm trying to show here. If I copy the path to this component and I go to that, I don't know, to this existing Markdown, and what I would do is I would say import showcase from, and I have the path, and then I say at the bottom showcase, and I go to the block and I go to that Ola. This thing below here is not a site, it's actually a component I just showed you. It's the full, you can even have fun with it because it's basically the Docusaurus site within, right? So in here you have a full-on functioning, whatever functionality you wanted, React component. So you can technically have so much fun with it. You can have the code snippet, you can have the latex, you can have new website within the website if you wanted. Think of it as an iframe within your site. That's what MDX basically is. So you can have is a unlimited number of functionalities available for you.
All right. New question from Sarah. How many pages can Docusaurus handle?
That's a good question. I don't think there is a limit really. I mean, it all depends on. I'm not aware of any hard limit. Let me be honest. But if you think from the perspective of how you work with Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, Algolia, localization, if you start, putting those in the equation, maybe there is a hard limit. I can't think of any really. Ultimately, it's a static site generator, right? So as many as you wanted to, especially if it's like, if you build it and you compile it to just HTML and CSS, I don't see any.
Okay. Question from Jeanne. Is there any support for integrating HTML pages generated from another tool?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm working with that right now. So another tool, it's an example of, for instance, Sphinx. If you are a Python developer, you generate API docs from Python files, or if you're working with Jupyter notebooks is another example, or Java docs and so on. I understand where the use case. is. So I would be honest, for V1, Docusaurus V1, that's fully functioning. So we even have a couple of projects, which I can link after the presentation as part of the slides sharing, like Blowtorch and AX. And those projects are very heavy on Python. And so they easily integrate Sphinx into the flow where it generates a nice UI. Instead of me talking about, let me actually show it to you. And it basically lets you, so this API reference, this is Sphinx HTML files. So it shows right here, it renders as you would render Sphinx. And what I like the most is it has, the same styling as the rest of the site. In V2, it's a bit more complicated. I would say the functionality parity between V1 and V2 in that sense is not there yet. We're actively working. By we, I don't mean Facebook per se, I mean the community of Docusaurus. But if you want to have it today, I would say V1 would be the best bet. And V2 is something that I hope will come sooner than later. But yeah, this is a good example. You can see in the URL as well, it's an HTML. And again, it's a Sphinx project that Python developers use heavily. The same for Java docs and so on. Great questions so far. Awesome question.
Cool. We also have a question in the chat from Charlie. Will there be native support for OAS, for example, Swagger, Readyth on Docusaurus soon?
I'm not quite sure of the question. Native support of
for OAS, for example, Swagger or Readyth on Docusaurus soon.
I'm not quite sure. I'll try to ask that question in Discord. I'm like the community, but I'm not sure of that. Okay. Honestly, the roadmap of the community obviously is open, but our main focus is like we try at Facebook, for instance, and just helping with the open source for Docusaurus is V2 at the moment, and really supporting functions like accessibility, localization. To have to answer this question, I'm not quite sure exactly, but I would be very happy to if you could ask, and I'll link in the slides. If you could go to the Discord that you can find at the very bottom of the Docusaurus site, and also in my slides, and ask that question. Would very much appreciate it to know the answer myself too.
Okay, so we still have a few questions. We're gonna try to wrap up quickly. Ravi Teja is asking, is there a way to integrate Docusaurus with Hugo?
I mean, there are two. So I'll show static. So there is that. I mean, there is this site, right, that from Netlify, I believe. Static gen that shows you all the list of all the static generated sites. Hugo is another tool, and Docusaurus is a different tool. There's also Next.js and Gatsby and plenty of others. Obviously, the market is large, and Hugo's been there I think, even longer than Docusaurus. But in general, it's two different tools. I don't know what exactly you would like to integrate, maybe some functionalities, but I'm a big proponent of not mixing tools in general, and it's just my personal opinion. And really, because it simplifies the tool chain, and choose a tool that works for your problem. But if you want to learn more why we're different from other tools, at the bottom of V2, it explains comparison to other tools, Gatsby, Gitbook, and so on.
Okay, cool. And so final question from Sarah again. Is it possible to easily keep the content and the website separated with Docusaurus? For example, via Git submodules or REST API as the source to fetch the data before compilation? And she has a follow-up question. Can you get rid of the generated JavaScript and only rely on the generated HTML? That's what I meant by fully static.
Yes, yes. So I hope it's in the main README of the project, but or if it's not, it's definitely in the projects that we build, where we explain how we deploy using Docusaurus. But basically, when we have a CI that basically builds the static sites, that build folder that I showed you, right? So this build folder that again gets generated by running whatever, yarn or npm run build or Docusaurus build ultimately, it creates all those static, just pure HTML, pure CSS. And we take this build folder and we move it and we commit it into the GH pages branch on GitHub. And that's what basically we render. And if it's not documented on the Docusaurus itself, which I'm sure it is, we have it documented as part of like any doc folder for individual projects at Facebook, which again, I believe it's just pure Docusaurus docs themselves. But yeah, this flow is what we usually follow: CI plus J, GitHub pages, and just pure deployment of simply the static files.